Jones and the Cowboys front office have cooked. You can go ahead and bet on the Dallas Cowboys to be your next Super Bowl champions. All right, kind of back to reality. I saw the opportunity to do that Beatty intro, so please forgive me on that one. On a more serious note, today I'm going to be going over and breaking down my thoughts on the Cowboys free agency, which isn't really technically over, but the big moves are out of the way, so I feel like it's appropriate to talk about now. Starting with our biggest free agency signing in a very long time, Jalen Thompson. He's a safety from Arizona, and from watching the tape, this guy looks like a breath of fresh air for our safety room. He's flying to the ball, making plays, and really seems able to cover ground, and that's something I don't think we've had in this position in a very long time. So overall, pretty massive upgrade. He seems to be a guy who can do everything you want from a safety: hitting, making plays on the ball, coverage, and kind of just roaming the field. Obviously, it's highlight watching, so his play is probably being exaggerated a bit, but even with that, he shows a lot of great qualities. I feel pretty confident saying he'll be the best safety on this team, and honestly, you can make the argument the best safety we've had in a very long time. Very excited about this signing, especially it's only a 3-year, $30 million deal, so $11 million, and I think the guaranteed was around 25, so it's nothing crazy. Solid value, especially for a position group we've really struggled with. And another thing that excites me is this seems like a pretty clear Christian Parker type signing, secondary focus, and giving him a really solid piece to work with this season. Next up, our second of 3 secondary signings, Kobe Durant. I think this is another really solid move. Durant wasn't a full-time starter for the Rams, but he played a good amount of snaps, and his highlights are pretty legit. A few things stand out immediately when watching. First, his playmaking ability. You watch his highlight, and it's a lot of interceptions and big-time plays. Like one, he's stripping a tight end while the guy's going down to the ground, and he returns it for a touchdown. And playmaking is honestly something we've been missing, especially after paying one of our corners for the exact same trait and not seeing it consistently. What separates him from a guy like Diggs is that he's not afraid to tackle. In his tape, you can see him lined up against tight ends and teams. They don't really do that unless you trust them to be pretty physical. It's a 1-year deal, $5 million. So overall, we're getting a guy with real experience, including meaningful snaps. And I don't think he comes in as our best corner, but he's a very solid depth piece and at a good price. Not a home run hit, but definitely a needed addition. Now our third and final secondary signing is PJ Locke. It's very clear that Jerry Jones and the front office wanted to address the secondary this offseason, and I think that makes a lot of sense, especially with a secondary-focused coach like Christian Parker. Locke was a backup for the Broncos, but he played under Parker, and he had some really solid moments. Some of his best plays even came in the playoffs, so he's another guy coming from a strong defense and making plays in pretty meaningful situations. When watching him, the biggest thing that stands out is ability to read plays. A lot of his highlights come from recognizing quick passes and reacting immediately. He's also not afraid to hit, and he moves really well. Honestly, he looks a lot quicker than most of our current secondary guys, maybe outside of Hooker. He's on a 1-year, $4 million deal, which fits the theme. Short term, low risk, see what you have in this guy type of signing. Overall, I feel a lot better knowing we've invested a bit more into what easily was our weakest unit. Now for the last 3 external signings, we got Sam Howell, Matt Hennessy, and Otito Ogbonnia. I'm grouping these guys together because outside of Otito, these feel more like depth moves in case of injury. At QB2, it feels like the spot is basically up for grabs since Joe Milton hasn't really shown much to inspire confidence. Hennessy is more of a backup option after losing depth at center with Brock Hoffman leaving. The most interesting one is, I don't have time for a full breakdown on him, honestly, but from a quick watch, his highlights weren't really flashy plays, like when he moves the guy, hits him with a spin move. They're more about understanding kind of the run game. He moves the blockers into the play and creates disruption. That's something we've been missing. It felt like our defensive linemen were chasing stats instead of maintaining gap integrity, and if he can help that, that's a big plus. Overall, he's a guy that I feel like was more run heavy, and I think that was another emphasis, is we want to stop the run from top to bottom. All these are kind of short term, low cost deals, so nothing really to complain about. So I wanted to kind of talk about a lot of the noise centered around the Cowboys free agency, or the lack thereof. Some of it is fair, but a lot of it ignores how this front office operates. The biggest criticism has been not signing a linebacker. That's somewhat fair, but I also think it's a bit misguided. Seems like the Cowboys were targeting Jacoby Dean, but he ended up with the Raiders alongside players he kind of wanted to join. Nothing you can really do there. I saw reports we offered $1 million or $2 million more, and he just took the Raiders deal. A bit disappointing, but that's not necessarily totally on the front office. You can't really do much there. What is disappointing is the lack of a real backup plan. That being said, I think this kind of tells us where we're going with the mentality of free agency, and something pretty important. This isn't a 1 year fix everything, and honestly, that's kind of a smart approach. This defense has too many holes to fix in one perfect offseason. I know some people are making the cases that it's happened before, but that's just pretty unrealistic. You're expected to make all of your free agency signings, all of them hit, and then you go ahead and draft guys who essentially play to the level of big time free agency signings and rookies. That's also asking a lot. Let's be real, Jerry Jones isn't going to go all in like that. He's not going to go from spending no money to all of the money. And I don't really blame him. If you go all in and you miss, you're kind of just wasting the rest of Dak's career, as you're likely not going to be signing short-term deals. These are going to be long-term deals where you're investing a lot of cap space into guys where Dak will end up being 36, 37. The next time you can really go all in. So if you do this bust the budget shit, you're essentially putting everything on black and hoping for the best. I understand the frustration of wasting another year, but with the offensive improvements and coaching upgrades, this could be a pretty sleeper type team if the defense improves over the season, especially if it's one of those cases where things really start to gel for them in the second half. I don't think you should be too upset, but I understand a bit of frustration. To fully understand our free agency, we kind of have to include those trades. First, Rashawn Gary for a 4th round pick, and second, Oso Adigiziwa for a 3rd round pick. I like one of them more than the other, but I don't hate either. Starting with Gary, we traded a 4th for a consistent pass rusher who's also strong against the run. This doesn't completely fix the edge rusher problem, but it sets the tone. This defense is focused on stopping the run. And getting a guy who can give you around 8 sacks and solid run defense for a 4th round pick, pretty good value. Especially with his contract being restructured. Overall, pretty solid trade to be honest. Now, Osa. I like this one less. We traded a $20 million a year D-tackle for a 3rd round pick. And yeah, I wish we got more, but I'm not really that shocked. Osa was the weakest of our top defensive tackles, and his contract was starting to look pretty rough. He made some flashy plays, but he was never that consistent, and that matters a lot at that position. Defensive talent can also be found weirdly cheap, considering to what people think. I've seen a lot of trades, and it feels like there's not a consistent gauge on what players are valued at, so I can't be too upset at getting just a 3rd round pick. I would have liked more, and I understand the move, especially since it was gonna have to get done earlier rather than dragging it out and waiting a while. One last thing, I was a bit disappointed we didn't complete more restructures. That also supports the idea that this is a multi-year build, so we'll see what that comes from, but I was kind of expecting us to get a bit more money to play around with in free agency, but I think that just kind of solidifies that this is maybe a 2 to 3 year plan rather than let's just hire a new defensive coordinator and sign a bunch of guys and hope for the best, which is fair. I think football especially, great things happen usually once you give it time to meld and kind of gel. I think basketball and other sports are a bit more, you can throw guys in and see a lot of things change quickly. Taking everything into account, the trades, signings, lack of restructures, and how other teams moved, I'm giving this free agency a B-. I'm generally pretty optimistic for the Cowboys, but I feel still a bit disappointed. I wanted more for Osa and more restructuring to allow for additional signings, but at the same time, I understand not going all in when it wouldn't fully fix the defense anyways. We had way too many holes, and I feel like just making a bunch of free agency signings isn't really going to fully address the problem, especially if they weren't necessarily guys that our defensive coordinator wanted to get. So yeah, B-, not bad, not amazing. Could have been better, could have been worse. I can understand if you're in the C or C+ range. I get it, depending on how pessimistic you are. Anything lower, and I kind of think you're just recency biased. You know, it's easy to hate on the Cowboys. Anything better, and I think you're just a bit delusional. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.